This week on the Jazz Creative, Grammy-winning composer Terence Blanchard talks family and film score.
There is this code of silence, and the code of silence is like a tacit approval.
Selma composer Jason Moran takes us inside the creative process.
People love the idea of being able to put their story inside that music.
Super bassist Christian McBride talks Gamble and Huff and the Philly sound.
I was born in Philly in 1972, and that was like the peak of Gamble and Huff's popularity.
And we'll hear some great new music from the planetary prince Cameron Graves and the Afrophysicist Theo Croker coming up next on the Jazz Creative. Terence Blanchard.
Basically, when I go to the movies and I see, Terence Blanchard did the music, I'm like, oh, I'm so excited to hear that.
Thank you.
But then when I end up watching the movie, I don't necessarily hear a Terence Blanchard sound.
Good.
I'm involved with the movie.
Good. That's what it's supposed to be.
Right. And then later on, when I see the credits roll, I'm like, oh, that's right, Terence did the soundtrack.
yeah.
So yeah, I know that's what you kind of want to pull across, but
Right.
how do you put that together? Do you take the Terence out when you're doing a movie, or?
No, really what it is, it's really about following the lines of the story. Letting the story be your guide, and putting your ego aside. Because sometimes as a musician, you can come in and say, oh man, I know this thing that's really hip, I can do this, and this would be great, but it won't really work for the scene.
Sure.
The story is the thing that's most important in that arena, and when you understand it, then it allows you to be flexible enough to say, okay, well maybe I should stretch this melody out here, or maybe I should take the melody out there because the performance of the actor is very strong, and I don't want to interrupt that energy. And when I'm working on a film, I try to go into it, man, the Roy bro, with just like a blank slate, because you have to allow it to show you what it needs.
It's actually creating its own music for you.
Exactly.
And you're just translating what you see.
Exactly. I used to get in the habit, and I still do it sometimes now, when I'm working on a film, I'll watch a scene like maybe 5 times. And when I'm watching it 5 times, each time you're starting to see where the dialogue lays. You're starting to get a sense of tempo for how it's being delivered. You really start to become consumed with everything in the shots, what's in the background, the temperature of the shot, all of those things. And it really starts to say to you, okay, well that means this musically, that means this rhythmically, that means this in terms of tempo. And then those things right there start to tell you what the music should be.
Yeah.
But you gotta learn how, that's the thing, man, you gotta learn how to, because when I first got in the film business, I was like, man, I started studying all of my, Stravinsky stuff, and said, oh, this would be great. And when I tried to fit it into the film,
It didn't work out.
Didn't work out at all, dude.
It's
It was
kinda-
awful, actually.
Yeah, it's kind of like having, an arsenal of notes that you're about to use for a gig. It's like, that's almost like cheating. You basically got to put them aside, and
Right.
when they present themselves,
Exactly.
then you can pull it out and
Right,
use it.
and which is true improvisation.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I know. I look at my son's generation, and we all grew up with issues, but I looked at his generation and I thought, wow, he's going through something I didn't go through. There was a moment in his life where he didn't hang out much because he had lost 3 friends to gun violence, and that was a devastating thing for him, which I could understand. And one of the kids was a guy who was a war veteran who had come home and was killed being robbed at a gas station. There was one incident that was very disturbing to me. He was going to school, he was in college, and he would walk to school every day. So this woman, her husband came home early in the morning, I guess come from work, I don't know exactly where. He comes in the house, somebody runs out the back, the woman says that the home was being broken into. The guy goes, what did the guy look like? He said, African-American male with dreadlocks. He starts scouring the neighborhood. He sees my son walking to school. He follows him to school, calls 911. My son goes up to his classroom. 7 police cars show up, 7. And they went room by room. They found my son, handcuffed him, and walked him from his classroom down outside with all of the students standing by, put him in the car, took him over to where the incident supposedly occurred, stood him up, and the woman goes, yeah, that's him. That's the guy that broke in my house. If it wasn't for, literally, a friend of mine, Hal Amos, he is a police officer that grew up in the house directly behind mine. We grew up together. He saw my son in the car and he goes, oh, I know this kid. He said, this kid didn't do this. He said, I know this kid. I've known him since, you know. And they went back and started to re-interview the woman, and her story just fell apart, you know. And the thing about that incident for me that's become like most important is, and this is the thing that I've been saying in all of my interviews, is that, you know, we see all of these stories about, you know, violence with police officers and our youth, right? But what needs to happen is all of the cops that are good cops need to start speaking out. You know, because I have a lot of friends on the police force, and all of the dudes that I know on the police force, they would never be involved in stuff like this. They're upstanding, great people, you know what I mean? But there is this code of silence, you know, and the code of silence is like a tacit approval in a weird way of some of these things. And I think when that starts to turn around, when we start to see the police say that's not who we are, then the trust from the community will start to turn back around, you know. But right now it's a dangerous time, and my son, we talk about it a lot. It's a dangerous time to be out here, you know, because there's a lot of heightened frustrations on both sides of this issue. And we need to be very, very careful and very, very open, you know, to what's going on and try to find some real solutions.
Jason Moran.
Jazz for a long time has kind of almost had some of its rebellious nature, tried to smooth it out. So, you know what I mean? But the music is protest music. There's always been protest music. And so the people that I gravitate towards also really accept that part of the canon and push it. And it's not, sometimes they don't push it necessarily what you might think would be overtly political, but they push it at the instrument, you know? So Jackie Bayard, you know, is my primary resource for information as a pianist. A great pianist who, you know, born in Worcester, Massachusetts, plays with Charles Mingus all those years, goes on to produce a body of work that spans the tradition of jazz piano, but also is like really thinking about how all the pieces work together. I mean, you know, he broke my head open every Monday at Manhattan School of Music playing stuff, and I'd just be like, and he'd say, "No, try it, try it, try it, try it," over and over.
He gave you that push. He's the sunshine of my soul. Man.
Yeah, the sunshine of my soul. Yeah. So it's people like that when you meet them. Also, he and Andrew Hill and Muha Richard Abrams, like they are essentially the fabric that I feel like I'm, you know, continuing their thread, because they kind of like really put their hands on me, and they, and they would turn me a direction, push me in the back of the head, and say, go into that. It's gonna feel like fire, and then you're gonna burn too. It's okay.
And what are you blending into your music today that's the fabric of our times?
Well, you know, just by the nature of kind of making stuff in a studio, like in a professional recording studio like here we are today, or whether or not I'm just literally sitting in front of my laptop kind of placing sounds on top of each other. That has been a part of my practice for so long that I think it's natural now. It just doesn't seem even odd to kind of work that way. And many other musicians I know also think and work in the same way. And so technology has really shaped the direction within which composers compose, the way bands work together, the way you now can have a video or you can work through Skype and have a lesson with someone. You know, I can hear a band playing in Chicago on Skype, or go online tonight and watch something live from the Blue Whale. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I do.
Like these things they totally inform then how I was like, oh, I heard them try that last night. So, but simply because the machine is sitting in front of me. And that's a tool. The machine is a tool. This is a machine too. The piano is a machine.
A mean one.
It's a mean one. But only until someone comes to do something with it.
I agree.
It ain't doing nothing right now. It ain't doing nothing. It's just looking nice. Until someone brings their knowledge to this thing, it becomes active. Like, this ain't for everybody, you know? like I think the way an artist works is they can't control their tendencies. Their tendency is to like I just make this,
Right.
and I hope people kind of get it because I do need that to happen. But I just make it without really knowing how it's gonna evolve. So like, right, let me give an example.
Yeah, man. What you
Like if
got?
I give an example, you know, like if I. So,
Man.
I don't know. I don't know where. I mean, I kind of know, and then I know I can change the direction. You know, then I know it can come back to a small little thing. You know, and technique is only a tool for trying to pull some of those ideas out about how to change direction.
Yeah.
You know, like how, you know, like if I'm watching like Allen Iverson shake out Michael Jordan. Remember that one? That was like classic. Like.
Yeah.
He did that, and then all of a sudden he broke Michael Jordan's ankles, you know?
Yeah.
And so like in music, it works in that same way, how to like shift and change the shape, but you can move and use this thing to help you kind of like navigate, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I just looked at you right now, man. You just changed the atoms in the universe around you. Because
For a moment.
Yeah, we're thinking a certain way, and then as soon as you hit a note, it's like captivated, and it's a whole other thing.
And there's something also about, the big thing is also about sound, you know, and I mean the overused term that it's a universal language, but I think we have to really start to think about it, or not that we haven't even found the answer, but how music functions in people's lives, in their daily lives, you know, and in cultures that are, you know, kind of like tribes that are in the forest, you know, how music and song functions as joy, you know, as sorrow to celebrate someone passing, you know, or a wedding reception, you know, like when people join together. Like what is sound, what's the sound that does that, that signals that, and people still hear? There's something about Beethoven that hundreds of years later, we still go to that code. Like, I need to hear that again. Really? But yes, we do, you know, Ellington, we still go to that code. I need to hear that again, you know?
Tell me about some of these movie scores that you've been working on that are exciting lately.
Well, there's no movie scores I'm working on, thank
Okay.
God. But I did do one.
Yes.
I did one, and it was Selma,
Yeah,
directed
that's
by
big.
Ava DuVernay, and that was very big. It was very big. And last year, when I was here at Monterey Jazz Festival, I was working on that score. I was slaving on it, trying to figure it out, you know, about what we were gonna do. But it was remarkable to be a part of a film that will really kind of will stand up, I think, for some decades as like a piece, you know? The kind of portrait she painted of Martin Luther King, but also of America at that time. And so to be, you know, kind of given the freedom to produce the music that would underscore some of those scenes was tremendous. And I'm thankful to her for really kind of bringing me into that collaboration. And but it was, you know, it really took a lot I mean, there were a lot of tears shed in the writing of it because those scenes they're hard to look at, you know. And that's not that far away.
Christian McBride.
I was born in Philly in 1972, and that was like the peak of Gamble and Huff's popularity. You know, Me and Mrs. Jones was a big hit the year I was born. My father was playing bass with the Delphonics, and then after he left the Delphonics, he went with Blue Magic, and then he went with Major Harris and Billy Paul. So all of the great Philly soul legends. That's like, that was the backdrop of my entire childhood, you know. So I always assumed that every city probably had a legacy that deep. And then once I got a little older and started getting into jazz, I realized the Philly jazz legacy, well, like, you know, the Heath brothers, Lee Morgan, McCoy Tyner, Benny Golson, Reggie Workman, Philly Joe Jones, all these, Ray Bryant, and all these great musicians from Philly. So I thought, wow. The Philadelphia Orchestra, Eugene Ormandy was the conductor at that time. And it is an absolutely great place to grow up. I mean, growing up in Philly in the late 70s and throughout the 80s, you heard the best in almost every genre, you know. You go see the Philadelphia Orchestra, you go see any great Philly jazz legend, Trudy Pitts and Mr. C, Jimmy Oliver, Edgar Bateman, Eddie Green, all of these local heroes who weren't necessarily household names in the jazz world at large, but in Philly they were the keepers of the flame. And Grover Washington Jr., rest his soul, was living in Philly at that time. He was born and raised in Buffalo, but he moved to Philly early in his professional career. So, you know, Philly adopted him, and of course, the early 80s was also the peak years of the 76ers power, you know. If you were a jazz fan, you were most likely a 76ers fan as well, you know. And, you know, Julius Erving and Darryl Dawkins, all those
Chocolate
great
Thunder.
Chocolate Thunder, man. Woo. You know, I was very, very lucky to grow up in Philly when I grew up there, man, because that was a great period in sports and music and just culture in general.
The Jazz Creative welcomes Cameron Graves. It's time for the Afrophysicist, Mr. Theo Croker.